Coogs House. All right, back to our regularly scheduled basketball season programming of sorts. We got a game today. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we get the podcast in your feed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel as well. We are over 310 subscribers as I'm looking at this right now. You guys are amazing. Continue to hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends to do the same. Remember, when we get to 500, we can do another giveaway. The one from 250 went great. More on that later. I'm hoping later this week, if not early next week. Once we get to 500, do another giveaway. I haven't decided what we want to give away yet, so you can comment down below if you got ideas on what we should do there. We're thinking a t-shirt type size thing, so we'll get too crazy. The other thing I'll say, too, is if you cannot think of what to comment today after watching this video, tell us if you like to work out or exercise first thing in the morning or late at night. And if you're late at night, I don't know how you go to bed afterwards. Other than watching a bunch of these episodes, of course, you don't fall asleep during Locked On Cougs, but maybe other ones. So today's episode is going to focus entirely on previewing the SMU basketball game. Probably the last time for a long time that SMU comes through the Fertitta Center tonight. We'll be previewing the game today, and then tomorrow breaking it down, and probably also doing some preview of Cincinnati over the weekend. Trying to do a little double duty tomorrow. Who knows? Probably depends on how tonight's game goes. The segments today are going to be fairly simple. The first, we're going to look at what Sampson had to say earlier this week. He spoke on Tuesday. We were doing football and recruiting talk at that point, so we can talk about what Sampson had to say about the SMU game on Tuesday. Kind of see if we can take him, read between his thoughts. Second segment's going to be more X's and O's, nitty-gritty kind of stuff. Look at the matchups, or as I see what the matchups will probably be like. We'll also look at kind of what SMU runs in offense and defense, because I got a couple looks at them. They played on Christmas Day against Hawaii. I saw that game. And then they played against TCU. I pulled that one up to watch as well. So I have some ideas what they want to run. And then the third segment is going to be kind of what I think is my prediction. You get to hear a little bit more about like what I think the game will look like. But first, in the first segment, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Sampson's words. Sampson, first of all, I should say, if you're new to the Cougs, he talks about everyone fairly glowingly. There's no such thing as a bad team in college basketball. And I will say I appreciate that, like, a team like Houston that plays in the American Conference this year, and as talented as they are, could probably get a little ahead of themselves at sometimes. And I don't think Sampson's one to, as a coaching staff, ever let that happen. Right. But he said that, they've gotten a lot better. They've gotten better in transition, especially this season. Pulling up, their head coach's name is Rob Lanier. It is his first season there. I didn't realize he was a Georgia State guy before. That's a Fun Belt conference. And so he is turning around the program a little bit. And frankly, as soon as he got there, he went and got some bigger Power 5 type recruits from the DFW Metroplex to come back to SMU, and has had a little bit more success as the season's gone on and gelling that. Sampson pointed out that Zurich Phelps, their leading scorer, is leading the American Athletic Conference in scoring. He's getting exactly 20 points a game. Anyway, he's getting exactly 20 points a game. And I will say that they seem to do a lot of things to get him the ball heading downhill. We'll get to that in the X and O's bit in a second. But he was very much on Sampson's radar in his conversation. He pointed out that Zach Nuttall was an all Southland Conference guy at his previous stops. Zach Nuttall was at Sam Houston State before graduating early and coming to SMU as a grad transfer last season. Nuttall himself is another guard. That's two perimeter guard type guys to keep an eye on. And Sampson is keeping his eyes on. Sampson himself knows that there was a mid-season move they made in their starting lineups. They took Zurich Phelps off of the point guard and moved him to more of a wing type position. And then they started a kid named Jalen Smith at the point guard because that opened up another guard spot. They'd been starting a big man, as if I'm understanding this correctly, 6'8", so he's kind of one of those tweener guys. But Stefan Sidorovic, and he still plays a lot of minutes. He's the sixth man right now. But that move Sampson sees as a kind of turning point for them as a team and has opened up a lot of the ways that they play. And so he's kind of looking at more those games, like I said, the TCU and Hawaii game, more recent note because they look a little bit different than they did early in the season. I think it's really important to note, and I'm glad Sampson pointed that out because SMU is 6-8 on the season, but they're playing a very different level of basketball in the last 3 weeks than they were the first month, right? And so the Sampson was quick to point out that that's kind of the key to him. I thought was interesting. I think the biggest name transfer they brought in, though, and Sampson brought up, I had forgotten that their quasi big man, Samuel Williamson's kind of a Williamson. He's a 6'8". I think he's listed. Was he listed at 210? Big, strong kid that's listed as a forward. Does some down low stuff. Does some outside stuff. He was a McDonald's All-American several years ago. He's a whatever year it is senior now. It's not just 4. But he started off at Louisville. And frankly, got to Louisville when they were kind of making their big time run. They come off their own Elite Eights and those kinds of things when he got there several years ago, right? And so I would count that as a win if I were Coach Rob Lanier to get an athlete like that back to SMU. And so all that is to say that Sampson is not taking these guys lightly and points out several athletic problems they have or that they provide. But I'd say that was pretty brief in his comments about SMU. Obviously, being Tuesday, he talked a little bit about the Buffalo Bills situation the night before. And kind of frankly, without harping on that too much, I do think it's interesting that he pointed out, it kind of makes every athletic program in the country reevaluate, all right, do we know where our AEDs are? Are we if someone goes into shock on the floor, do we know what we're doing? And he feels very he took the moment to plug the athletic training staff and the staff they got at U of H as being so skilled, talented, and frankly, he said they even had a moment in this preseason where they went through and taught the kids how to use it and where they were in the facility. Cool moment, I thought, as far as being timely and tying those kinds of lessons into your own program, and just let you know, Sampson's always thinking, right? He kind of strikes you as he is a grandpa now. He's kind of old wise man kind of stuff, but he is always thinking ahead as okay, what comes next? And then people ask him about recruiting. It does sound there's some movement there. Redshirt freshmen's gonna be traveling with the team the rest of the way this season. We have another kind of a couple of days in between games next week. We'll talk some more about basketball recruiting, hopefully. But it looks like those were kind of the questions coming from the audience were not, rather from the media, were not super focused at SMU. So after he gave a big opening spiel there, he was kind of brief and focused a lot more on his culture and his team and what they're doing. And at this point in the American Conference Athletic season, I feel like that's probably worth noting. I was refreshed that they're not taking this game lightly based on how much work he'd done for those opening couple of questions. And if I were a betting person, I imagine that he probably does that for every game all year long. And if you're a betting person, you should go to betonline.net. Now, betonline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, analysis. Get the latest odds and trends from every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season, basketball, World Cup. They got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at betonline.net as well. It's always the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting info. Head to the site today. You can use mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts, and I've been telling you all week long to look at that game when they have TCU as a 13.5 point underdog, right? I told you last week when they had TCU as a 7.5 point underdog to Michigan that seems out of whack. And I'm telling you, going into the Georgia game, that 13.5 points feels a little bit out of whack. Now, that's not just because I watched TCU play SMU in basketball and I feel a little bit of an affinity for the purple. We play those guys next year in conference when we move into the Big 12. I don't want to root for them at all. It is nice to see the state of Texas doing well, I guess. What I will say is TCU played a ton of weird one-score games this year, and I just don't have faith that their games will be anything but one-score games. So when I see 13.5 points, it's at least 2 touchdowns. I don't think it's gonna be. I don't think it's gonna be. I don't know if TCU wins. I just don't think it's gonna be that big a spread. So I'm saying to pick TCU with the points there. I wouldn't go with the money line, but take them with the points there. And I think you should do it at betonline.net. That's where the game starts. All right. So if I look at this as more of X's and O's type stuff, obviously that wasn't at the forefront of the media questions for Sampson. So I did a little bit of digging. And I want to go through the matchups as I see them and then talk about the kind of sets and problems they present schematically. So I imagine, Jalen Smith is starting point guard, but he is 6'4", and at their backcourt, he's actually their tallest guy. I think Houston puts Tramon Mark on him because of Tramon Mark's length, and that Sampson is kind of seeing him as like a key cog in their machine, right? Like they've changed up a lot of things, and even if he's their biggest guard and their point guard, I think Tramon Mark will be on him, and I want to say that's because the length should A, cover up passing lanes, and B, kind of take away Jalen Smith's advantage he's had as a 6'4" point guard in college basketball so far, right? That said, I could also see a traditional matchup where we see Jamal Shead on him just because he's the best guard defender perhaps in the country. He's just a little bit smaller and, kind of leaves that advantage to the 6'4" guy. But I imagine you'll see Tramon Mark on him for stretches, and I bet he starts the game out on him. That leaves Jamal Shead and Marcus Sasser somewhat interchangeably cover Zurich Phelps and Zach Nuttall. Now, I think I'd put Shead on Phelps and Sasser on Nuttall just because their offense kind of relies fairly heavily on getting Phelps going. Phelps is getting like 20 points a game, and Nuttall's getting more like 15. That's a very high-scoring backcourt in college basketball. And so I think that obviously Sasser is a great defender and Shead is a great defender. It's not any secret. I feel like Phelps is kind of the more important guy to what they do, and I feel like Shead has just got a slight edge as a defender. In both cases, though, Houston is giving up a couple inches. They got Phelps and Nuttall both listed at 6'3". I've seen Sasser and Shead listed all over online as 6'1" or 6'2". I tend to think Shead looks a little bit short, so I think he's probably like about 6'1", maybe rounds up to 6'1", and Sasser's rounding up to 6'2". But all that to be said, that I imagine again with Mark on Jalen Smith, I'd probably put Shead on Phelps and Sasser on Nuttall, which leaves the big men. So Samuel Williamson, the big former McDonald's All-American, kind of plays in and outside. That's a natural matchup for Jarace Walker when he is in the game. That's not to say that other big men can't cover him when they rotate some of those guys in, like the Reggie Chaney's of the world, JVR Francis of the world. I imagine you'll see J1 Roberts on him, but in the starting lineup, I think we're going to see Jarace on him because he kind of has the same in and out versatility. Jarace can play the big man down low defensively and move with him on the perimeter very, very well. As long as he doesn't foul him shooting threes, I guess Sampson will probably leave him out there to do that. Their big man is Jeff Odigi. I've heard that pronounced several ways online, and that makes me uncomfortable to say, but Jeff Odigi is 6'9", 255. He's from Houston, Provision Academy. He is a traditional garbage big man, and I mean that like garbage, like tough, dirty, not like he's not any good. He's very good. I imagine that draws the J1 Roberts to start. I could see, though, because he is a big, strong guy, that Houston cycles guys through. JVR Francis gets his 10 minutes, a couple fouls, and uses his length. Reggie Chaney he's got like a bunch of like old man tricks. He's been around for so long, right? He comes in and uses some of that toughness. He's kind of gritty, right? Uses some of that toughness. And I could see a rotation of bigs kind of knocking that guy around a little bit. Because frankly, I think that's what it's going to take. He is not like a great scorer. I think it looks like 8.5 points per game. But they rely fairly heavily on Odigi and Williamson for the rebounding. And honestly, I feel like I trust our guys there weirdly because they're not crazy out athleted in a way they might have been against Oregon or Alabama even, right? The only guy with any significant minutes off the bench in a per game sense is Todorovic, the forward that I mentioned started when they had Zurich Phelps playing the point guard spot. And so, I think that part of that move is really just to get into more traditional sets. They rotate one of those guards out, Jalen Smith or Phelps or Nuttall or whoever, and put him in as a forward. I think we're going to rotate forwards too. I wonder if Houston will have some advantage in rotating guard depth in as well. They've gone to Emanuel Sharp fairly early last few contests. I could also see this being a Terrance Arceneaux game because we'll get to a minute what SMU does on defense, but kind of opens up some lanes for him to shoot the ball. And we know that that's at least what Sampson thinks of Arceneaux in the present tense. I know projecting future tense, he's got a lot more potential in his bag, and it'd be nice to see that kind of stuff in a conference game as well. Offensively, in sets, they run what's traditional. They run either 4 out 1 in kind of stuff because Samuel Williamson can do that. But the other sets, they run a lot of our horns sets. So the point guard brings the ball to the floor, and then it looks like upside down horns where you've got shooters or wing guys in the corners, and then your posts are both kind of at the lane lines, but at the top of the key 3-point area. Point guard goes off of one of the two, and then one of them shoots down to the block, and they kind of turn that into eventually a handoff that leads to a Spain pick and roll. And by Spain pick and roll, this is things that national team Spain did many years ago, where basically they'd run a pick and roll with the big guy after one of these handoffs, the big guy that's still on the outside. So think Samuel Williamson's out there for a handoff on Zurich Phelps, right? And then as he's rolling, the low big man goes and screens the guy that switched onto him, or the guy covering the outside big. And so it's a screen the screener kind of situation on a pick and roll play. They do that to open up Samuel Williamson a lot because he is such a versatile athlete. And then truthfully, what they get accomplished more often than not is they're getting Phelps or Nuttall moving downhill, and then that kind of forces one of the big men to be out of position and too far away from the basket to defend the rim, right? What I'm thinking here is that Houston does such a great job of trapping up the ball screens that they may have to kind of alter how they do that, and they may pull the ball out and dump it in to make Samuel more of a distributor. He is not a big assist guy statistically, and teams haven't forced him into it in a couple games I've watched. And so I'll be interested to see how that works for him. He is a tremendous athlete, though, so they're going to need to get a guy in front of him and tag the roller. We know that in Tulsa, the first few possessions, Houston had trouble with that. So we'll see how they handle that there. In the Hawaii game, I thought, first of all, Hawaii game was Christmas Day. I remember SMU wore red, Hawaii wore green, and it ended in a buzzer beater that was kind of a crazy comeback for Hawaii. They were down like 10 or 12 points at one point in the second half in that game. For most of the game, the only shots SMU had taken were in the paint / layup type floater shots, right? Close shots, threes, or free throws. They were avoiding the mid-range. I want to see Sampson's defense and the way that it runs people off the 3-point line impact that a little bit. I wonder if he can get guys into that mid-range where they're uncomfortable. And so we'll see kind of what he and the Cougars do defensively there to force that, because clearly it's not what they want to do. They didn't shoot them in that game, and then they avoided shooting them as best they could. They got a couple up, but they didn't look like they were trying to get to those spots. They just got kind of late shot clock kind of shots up in the mid-range in the TCU game. So can Houston force them into more mid-range shots? Defensively, I don't mean to count my chickens before they hatch. I wasn't too terribly impressed with SMU. They were slow to double the post, but in a way that made me think that they kind of want to double the post. Like, it looked like the guards were hesitant to just leave their people and go down in both the SMU and both the Hawaii and TCU games. But they eventually did get there. So I couldn't tell if they were trying to or the schematic thing was there. They played behind the post with the guy covering him, which made me also think they want to double the post, because otherwise that's just a really easy entry pass. So I imagine there'll be some interesting things there. That initially makes me think this is a Jawan Roberts gets 15 points kind of game, very, very easily, right? Because A, we know what he does when he puts his right shoulder in guys, gets to his left hook, and B, Sampson loves feasting on that kind of stuff. You can get some high-low action with Jarace at the high and Jawan Roberts low. You can get high-low action with Jawan Roberts high and Javier Francis or Reggie Chaney low as well. And then I frankly love, it's called a stampede cut, where basically you line up your 5-man, a Reggie Chaney type 5-man out at the 3-point line. And the goal is not that, like, instead of posting up about 4 feet away, he lines up 25 feet away and just goes a full-on sprint to the spot he would typically be posting up in. Guard gets to drop it off, and then he's got a full head of steam, right? I wonder if they're going to do that kind of stuff to get them the ball actions down there. Part of the reason I wasn't impressed with them is they were switching a lot of ball screens, even like a 1-5 ball screen at the top of the key. SMU was that is, and they were playing fairly level, not doing anything too crazy. If they switch those ball screens, Sasser's going to have a field day. And so I imagine they're trying to treat him a little differently because he's, preseason conference player of the year and those kinds of things. So I'll be interested to see if they change their tendencies from the TCU and Hawaii games for that, but we'll see. And then, honestly, I don't know once they change how well rehearsed they'll be at those things. They've had a few days they hadn't played since Sunday, and it's a conference game, so they're preparing. They got a home and home, so game plans are important. But I don't know what we'll see that they do. Lastly, they're not a great rebounding team. Against Hawaii, they were fairly even, but they had kind of got a big lead early, like I said, and so some of the rebounds came back to bite them. They were a fairly even rebounding team against TCU as well. In watching the clips there, I thought it was interesting with so many free throws being shot in that game. That led to a lot of free throw rebounds, and those count the same. I wonder what it would be like without so many free throw rebounds. Again, TCU shot 29 free throws, and that means they missed 11 of them. SMU got a lot of those 11 rebounds, and so that adds to their total. And if it was an even total with that 11, what would have been like without it? So I say that Houston could have a good big day on the boards, and that's interesting because Sampson's kind of always written off this team as a rebounding team thus far. And what does that mean if they can kind of get back on track in the American Conference? Speaking of back on track, it is the new year. And if it's new year, new you kind of year for you, let me talk to you a little bit about Built Bar, the company you should be doing it with. Built Bar's delicious treat that doesn't have all the fat or calories. You got to go try it. It gets you through the holidays, especially after a season where I'm eating a lot. We had at Christmas at my grandma's house, we had 3 pies, 2 cakes. My grandma does bake Jesus a birthday cake for Christmas. Built Bar is a great way to get back on track because it's healthy and actually tasty. For starters, it's covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, real chocolate. They have unreal flavors like churro and peanut butter brownie, all kind of coconut almond kind of stuff under that real chocolate. I'm not sure how they do it, but it tastes like a candy bar while maintaining all of your amazing macronutrients. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. You need to wait around to get a box. For years, been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club as well. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk in the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, remember to grab the 13-bar box. Their hit flavors: brownie, batter, and churro. You can thank me later. My favorite, though, and if you just want my advice here, is the coconut almond. It tastes like an Almond Joy. If you're an Almond Joy person, if not an Almond Joy person, probably don't like it. But if you like Almond Joy, the coconut almond tastes like Almond Joy, and that's one I'm going to recommend that you go get. So go get a Built Bar at Built.com today. All right, third segment. I'm talking to you about my preview. I went to KenPom to do some research for this. KenPom was not too nice to the Mustangs. Houston, for reference, and KenPom has the 14th ranked adjusted offense, 2nd ranked adjusted defense. They're projecting Houston to go 16-2 in conference. To be fair, I think that there's probably 1 or 2 tough road games in there that they're assuming will go south. I also, to be fair, have not mentioned that I don't think Houston goes undefeated in conference. I don't think Houston goes undefeated on the year either. However, this is not a very favorable deal. These analytic statistics for SMU. Admittedly, look at the whole season. Sampson, I opened with talking about he focused on just the more recent part of it, and that probably does throw off the analytics somewhat. However, SMU on KenPom, where Houston is ranked number 1, SMU is ranked 141st. Yep, you read that right. They've got the SMU offense at 174th for adjusted efficiency, and defense at 125th. Now, admittedly, their defense is slightly above D1 average. And they're holding the ball for about a little more than half a shot clock, playing a relatively slow pace. Houston, actually, for what it's worth, also plays at what feels like a slow pace, but relative to the entire country, they're playing about 5 or 6 possessions faster per game. And so 5 or 6 possessions slower per game. They're not that far off of track there. I said to say that on paper, this shouldn't be close. Houston's got future pros on it. I don't know that SMU does, although Phelps and Williamson might get shots on just talent alone. I don't know if Nuttall does or not, but what I will say, though, is we saw in the football game that SMU takes this rivalry seriously. We also saw in the football game, and we've seen in SMU across the last 12 months, they're upset that Houston's going to the Big 12. And they're not, right? They were just as upset, was been a dozen years ago now, when TCU went to the Big 12, and they did not. Frankly, they feel like they're kind of the school moving on up the charts that's getting left out. They are. They also don't have the number 2 team in the country. Speaking of being number 2 team in the country, that fuel for the rivalry is the SMU side. The Houston side here, well, I don't know if Houston actually thinks about SMU basketball in the same way. We saw what happened to Houston the last time they had a very clear-cut chance to become the number 1 team in the country. They played Kent State in a game that was way, way too close, right? 49-44 at home on a Saturday afternoon. Now, admittedly, I think Kent State is a tournament team. I think they're a very good basketball team. They're not a 5 points close to Houston at home kind of basketball team. But the stars had very clearly aligned with wins and losses throughout the week that if Houston had beaten Kent State that Saturday, and they did, they would go on to be the number 1 team in the country. Those stars are aligning again this week, right? UConn and Purdue have both lost. I guess Purdue lost right for the last ranking, so Houston moved up to 2, and now UConn has lost to Rutgers. And so theoretically, if Houston handles business on Thursday and handles business on Sunday, they should be the number 1 team in the country again. I could see the same way. I think that pressure got to them a little bit in that Kent State game. I could see it popping up again. Hopefully, the second time around, it's not as strong. And they played a couple weeks as the number 1 team in the country. So, admittedly, that there should be some comfort there. But that's an external thing I see seeping its way in here. But that's all external things. On paper and hopefully on the hardwood, this should not be close. But if some of those things get in there, that rivalry up and down I-45, this... are we number 1 team in the country kind of nonsense. Last time through the American Conference, you got a bullseye in your back. All of those things. And then the natural Houston versus Dallas thing that is just in everything we do make me worry that, like, if Sampson, in my notes here, if Sampson had not been so profoundly like, we can't take this game lightly to open up media availability on Tuesday, I'd be very worried. I'm still worried about it because of those things. And frankly, I just get a little jittery and nervous before all games. But I'll be talking about it and tweeting through the nervousness on Thursday night. So if you can find me to talk to me on Twitter, you can find me at Painsworth512. It's PAINSWORTH512. I love to talk all things Cougs. Had a great recruiting episode yesterday with Rob Sellers. So if you want to go check that out, we can talk more about recruiting as well. I'm constantly talking to Rob now, bugging Rob about who's going to be where. So we can talk recruiting in football, basketball, etc. We can talk Houston Rockets drop one. I guess they cut it to 11 by the end of the game. They dropped an ugly one that Steven Silas got ejected out of on Wednesday night. The Astros are kind of the opposite of the spectrum, right? So we can talk about them as well. I don't want to talk about the Texans, but I guess we can talk about the Texans. Do whatever you want to. Then find me at Painsworth. I want you to talk about all things Houston sports. Obviously, we talk about sneakers and those kinds of things as well. Whatever you like to, you find me at Painsworth512, all social media handles. Make sure you subscribe and download the show. Thank you all so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball, not just because I was on 2 segments of it the other day following that UConn loss where we talked about Houston becoming the number 1 team in the country and what that would mean again, as well as like Houston moving to the Big 12 and how crazy the basketball conference will be, but because Andy and Isaac both run a great show, so make sure to check them out at Locked On College Basketball, Locked On's national college basketball show each and every day. Thank you all again so much for tuning in. Locked On Coogs is proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team every day. Go Cougs.